Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about something you probably don't think about until it's already cost you years of your life. Picture this. You're brushing your teeth, half asleep, staring at the bathroom mirror. The foam is pooling in one corner of your mouth. Your hair is doing whatever it wants. And for the briefest moment, you catch your own eyes in the reflection. And instead of the usual autopilot scroll of morning thoughts, emails, groceries, meetings, you think, what if I'm not scared of failing? What if I'm scared of succeeding? You probably won't survive what comes after that question. It's like setting off a fire alarm in a library full of carefully stacked excuses. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always like seeing who's watching and where you are. Now, let's get comfortable and let's get started today. It started on a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray-smeared day where everything outside looks like it's been filtered through an old sock. I was brushing my teeth, same as always, letting my brain warm up the usual loop of to-do lists and low-level existential dread, when I looked at myself and thought something wrong. Not dark, not morbid, just disruptive. I thought, what if I don't actually want what I say I want? It felt like someone else had slipped the thought into my mind, like a prank. But it wasn't a joke. It was a splinter under the skin of my certainty. All this time, I've been saying I wanted more growth, more success, more leveling up, whatever that meant. I'd read the books, watch the TED Talks, posted about the grind. But I couldn't remember the last time I had actually crossed a finish line. Every big goal somehow dissolved into busy work, or worse, a fresh excuse. And here's the worst part. I could always justify it. Because I'm smart. That's not a brag. It's a confession. Intelligence is a double-edged blade, and I've used mine more times to cut myself down than build anything up. There's a term called strategic self-handicapping. It means you intentionally do things to get in your own way, so that if you fail, you have an excuse. Yeah, that one hit me like cold mouthwash. See, the lie I'd been telling myself, over and over, was that I was just waiting for the right time, when I was more prepared, when I had the energy, when the stars aligned, and Mercury stopped whatever the hell it's always doing. But the truth was less romantic. I wasn't waiting. I was hiding. And not because I didn't think I could win. It was because I suspected I could. And then what? Then I'd have to keep going. I'd have to show up over and over and maintain it. Grow it. Risk more. Risk being seen. Do you know the average human blinks about 15 to 20 times per minute? That's over 28,000 times a day. You're missing whole chunks of the world in those blinks, and maybe that's how I was treating my life. Blinking through it. Never really locking eyes with myself in the mirror long enough to ask hard questions. So there I was, toothbrush in hand, foam dripping down my chin, realizing that most of my dreams were actually just strategies to delay disappointment. And success? That wasn't the goal. It was the threat. It made sense. Success isn't safe. People think fear of failure is the big enemy. But failure lets you go back to bed. Success makes you answer calls, sign contracts, show up with your zipper up and your voice steady. It demands performance. And performance invites judgment. There's no hiding behind potential once you've actually delivered. And if you're anything like me, you've built a small shrine to potential in your head. That little voice that says, you could do something great someday. That voice is addicting. It's comforting. It's also a liar. Want to know a fun off-topic fact? Octopuses have 3 hearts, and when they swim, they stop one of them. That's how I felt chasing success. Like I had to stop part of myself just to keep moving forward. Like I couldn't swim without sacrificing something vital. I think that's where it started to click. That success, real success, the kind you define for yourself and actually pursue, requires wholeness. You can't do it with half a heart shut off. You can't blink your way through it. And you certainly can't coast on cleverness alone. But as soon as I got even a whiff of that truth, my brain did something deeply human and incredibly frustrating. It started fighting back. Not with facts, but with feelings. A little anxiety here, a random craving there. Suddenly, I had to clean my room. I needed to answer emails. Anything but sit with that insight. That's the paradox. We spend years chasing clarity And then when we get it, we run. Because clarity doesn't always come bearing flowers. Sometimes it shows up with a sledgehammer. And there's a phrase floating around academic circles: motivated reasoning. It's when people process information in a way that suits what they already want to believe. I realized I'd been applying it to myself. I didn't want to admit I was afraid of success. So I built a whole belief system around staying small, around being realistic. That's the lie that hurt the most, that I was just being practical. But the mirror doesn't care about your narrative. It doesn't care about your strategy. It just reflects. And what I saw that morning was someone way too good at hiding behind average. And once you see that version of yourself, really see them, you can't unsee it. The toothpaste dries on your lips, and suddenly, the day stretches in front of you like a dare. So yeah, that's how it started. Not with some triumphant decision or dramatic failure. Just a glance in the mirror and a quiet, unwanted truth. I guess that's how most of this goes. Not with lightning bolts, but with quiet, inconvenient whispers you can't ignore. I once read that the average office worker touches their smartphone over 2,600 times a day. I'm not proud to say I think I may have broken that record a few times. There's this moment, early afternoon, usually, where you open your phone to check one thing, and suddenly it's an hour later. You've learned nothing except the state of someone else's vacation, and your coffee's gone cold. That was my entire approach to life for a while. Endlessly busy, dangerously unproductive. You ever notice how productivity tools can actually make you feel more accomplished without helping you accomplish anything? I had apps for task management, subtask management, Pomodoro timers, bullet journals, color-coded spreadsheets. I once spent 3 hours organizing a to-do list instead of doing any of the things on it. That's not a joke. That's a cry for help. But at the time, it felt like movement, like I was building momentum. What I was really doing, though, was staying in motion to avoid direction. I was always just on the verge of doing the real thing. After this last bit of prep, this last tweak, this last mental warm-up, I lived in a permanent pre-game locker room. I genuinely believed I was working hard. And technically I was. I was exhausted, just not from producing anything valuable. I was tired from running away from the edge of what mattered. There's this quote I can't get out of my head. Don't confuse activity with achievement. You'd think I wrote in Sharpie on my bathroom mirror, but no, it was buried somewhere in a forgotten Pinterest board called Boss Mode. Yeah, let's not talk about that. But the quote stuck even when everything else slid past. Because it named the thing I was doing that no one called me out for, being busy enough to look productive but not focused enough to move the needle. I was addicted to the illusion of effort. Like if I stayed busy enough, maybe success would sneak up and tap me on the shoulder. But success doesn't sneak. It knocks, loudly. And if you don't open the door, it walks away. I remember this one stretch, about 3 months, where I convinced myself I was on the verge of a major breakthrough. I had every intention of starting a creative project that could have changed my trajectory. I set deadlines. I announced things on social media, a classic move when you want to feel accomplished without actually doing anything. I even made a playlist, a whole playlist. But the work? It never started. I told myself I was waiting for the right window. Spoiler alert, there is no window. Life is mostly walls unless you're willing to punch through one. There's an ongoing academic debate about whether multitasking reduces performance or just redistributes attention. Either way, I was proof that doing everything at once is a great way to do nothing well. I kept myself in a constant state of shallow activity, so I never had to go deep. Because depth? That's where the good stuff lives and where the fear hides. You'd think I was afraid of failing. But deep down, I knew if I really gave something everything I had, it might actually work. And then what? I'd be visible, accountable, maybe even expected to repeat it. That's a weird kind of pressure, one most people don't talk about. The pressure not just to succeed, but to stay successful. There was a weekend where I tried to unplug. Just be quiet. No phone, no screens. Do some thinking. That lasted about 4 hours. I ended up alphabetizing my kitchen spices and reorganizing my sock drawer by fabric softness. Like some kind of nervous Victorian grandmother. Why? Because silence invites honesty. And I wasn't ready for the kind of thoughts that show up when the noise dies down. Quick side fact for you. Hummingbirds can't walk. They can perch, they can hover, but their legs are too weak to actually stroll around like other birds. That's how I felt, constantly in flight, because landing meant admitting I didn't know how to move forward once I was grounded. Eventually, I started catching on to the pattern. Every time something real was on the table, a pitch, a proposal, a commitment, I'd suddenly get very busy. I became a master at filling the space. Text to reply to, podcast to listen to, friends I hadn't called in forever. All of it disguised as responsibility. None of it progress. And nobody questioned it. That's the really sinister part. We live in a culture that worships hustle. So being overbooked, that's considered noble. No one asks if the hustle is hollow. They just applaud the motion blur. But I started asking, quietly at first, then louder. Why do I keep doing this? What am I afraid will happen if I actually focus? What if I stopped running circles and picked a direction, even if it's the wrong one? Because even the wrong road eventually takes you somewhere. Loitering at the starting line only guarantees you never move. There's something wild about admitting you're the one holding the leash when you've spent years barking at the world for keeping you tied down. You start seeing your reasons for what they really are, rationalized fear in a business suit. And it makes sense. Smart people, especially introspective ones, are often the best at building convincing cages. You get so good at explaining why you can't do something that you forget you're the one who decided it in the first place. So I started experimenting, not with big leaps, just tiny moments of honesty. I'd ask myself, what would I do today if I wasn't afraid? And the answers were annoyingly clear. Write the damn page. Send the proposal. Follow up on the lead. Little things. Things I didn't have time for. So I started doing just one per day. Nothing fancy. Just an act of rebellion against my own busy work. And little by little, the fog lifted. That's the thing about being stuck in fake productivity. It keeps your feet moving, but your soul flatlined. And once you taste real movement again, the fake stuff starts to rot in your mouth. So no, I wasn't too tired, or too busy, or not ready. I was just scared, but I didn't know that yet. Not fully. That realization was still waiting for me, just around the corner. The day I finally got what I wanted, just one little slice of success, I felt like I was choking on it. Not literally, but close enough. It wasn't even a huge thing, just a message. A short email from someone I respected, someone I thought was way out of my league. They'd seen something I made, and they liked it. Said they wanted to talk, maybe collaborate, maybe more. It was exactly what I'd been manifesting, right? Proof I wasn't invisible. Validation that I wasn't delusional. Except the second I read it, I felt this cold spike of nausea, like I just swallowed a marble. I closed the email, got up, walked around my apartment like I was checking for leaks or burglars or maybe a secret trapdoor I could crawl into. Why? Why would something good make me feel like I've been hit by a slow-moving bus? Because success is real. It's physical. It's not like a dream. It has weight. And the second someone handed me a piece of it, I felt the full freight train of now what slam into my chest. You see, up until that moment, everything I did was safe. Because I wasn't seen. My audience was imaginary. The stakes were pretend. But that email, that tiny, polite paragraph, it turned the lights on. Suddenly, I was no longer talking into a void. I was standing on a stage I didn't know I had walked onto. And I panicked. I did what any rational adult might do. I ignored the message for 4 days. I drafted responses, deleted them, Googled things like how to respond to successful people and imposter syndrome, but make it chronic. I reorganized my bookshelf. I even vacuumed under the couch, which is something I only do when I'm actively avoiding life. You know what's funny? Sloths can hold their breath longer than dolphins. Isn't that wild? These slow, sleepy creatures can actually stay underwater for up to 40 minutes. Dolphins tap out around 10. That day, I felt like I was both drowning and drifting, slow but panicked, trying to pretend I was calm while gasping for air. That tiny breakthrough wasn't just an opportunity. It was a mirror, and it showed me something I didn't want to see, that I didn't feel ready. Not because I wasn't talented or capable, but because I'd spent so long preparing that I forgot what action looked like. I'd made the prep the point. So when action actually knocked, I didn't have a script for it. I remember staring at my computer screen with that email open and thinking, if I say yes, everything changes. And part of me whispered, you're not built for this. Not out of humility, but fear. There's this phrase psychologists use, cognitive dissonance. It's the tension that happens when your beliefs and your reality don't line up. And in that moment, my brain couldn't handle that someone else believed in me more than I believed in myself. So instead of leaning into the opportunity, I spiraled into defense mode. My brain started filing complaints. What if they're just being polite? What if you mess it up? What if they find out you're not as good as they think you are? Even when someone offers you a ladder out of the pit, if you think they'll look too closely on the way up, you'd rather stay down. I eventually wrote back. Sort of. I crafted the safest, most casual message I could. Thanks. Would love to chat sometime, smiley face. Let me know what works for you. Notice the use of sometime, the emoji, the lack of confidence. That wasn't a yes, it was a soft maybe, a diluted deferral of enthusiasm. And a reply? Silence. Just nothing. Maybe they got busy. Maybe they sensed I wasn't serious. Maybe it was my energy. I'll never know. But I do know this. I fumbled that opportunity not because I wasn't good enough, but because I wasn't brave enough. Not then. And here's the thing, they never wrote back. That little elevator ride stopped between floors, and I stood there with my metaphorical briefcase and buttoned-up nervous system, realizing I'd stalled. That moment haunted me, not because I blew a big break, but because it proved a theory I didn't want to test, that success doesn't always feel good, especially if you've built your whole identity around almost getting there. It's like climbing a mountain only to realize you're terrified of heights. You look back and think, was the hike just a stall tactic? Did I really want this view? There's a reason why some of the most brilliant people you know never publish, never pitch, never share. Because once you win, the game changes. You're no longer the underdog. You become the one people watch, the one expected to follow through. And if you've grown comfortable being full of potential, then becoming actualized feels like a betrayal. But the truth I had to swallow is, there's no such thing as permanent potential. It either gets spent or it expires. That realization doesn't come gently. It creeps in like a song you've heard before but never listened to. And suddenly the lyrics make sense. Suddenly it's not background music. It's the soundtrack to your inaction. I used to think I was afraid of not making it. But really, I was terrified of what would happen if I did. Because success means more than applause. It means decisions. It means standing up instead of fading out. It means being known. And there's something deeply vulnerable about being known, especially when you've spent your life perfecting a performance. So yeah, that was the breakthrough. And it terrified me. But it also taught me something else. That fear doesn't always wear a scary mask. Sometimes it shows up in a win. And if you're not paying attention, you'll treat the prize like a problem. I used to think being smart would save me. That my intelligence was this golden parachute, always ready to deploy and float me gracefully over any failure, any risk. But I learned the hard way that being smart can be a trap. Because if you're not careful, intelligence doesn't make you bold. It makes you clever. And cleverness, my friends, is often the most elegant disguise for fear. I was the kind of person who could talk myself into or out of anything. Need a reason not to apply for that opportunity? Easy. It's not the right fit. Want an excuse to delay a launch? No problem. I'm waiting for better timing. I could construct a philosophical thesis around why staying small was the wise choice. And worst of all, I believed it. Have you ever heard of executive function? It's basically your brain's management department, planning, focus, self-control. People assume that if you're smart, your executive function is flawless. Nope, not always. Intelligence doesn't guarantee consistency. If anything, it gives you better tools for explaining your inconsistency. That was me, the walking TED Talk of self-sabotage. I could analyze my patterns in real time. I'd know I was procrastinating. No, I was avoiding the hard thing. And instead of changing course, I'd break it down like a detective in a noir film. Ah, yes. Notice the twitch in the left eye. That means I'm about to abandon this task for a perfectly reasonable distraction. Once I was supposed to submit a pitch for a creative grant. I had weeks, did all the research. outline my idea, even did mock drafts. And the night before the deadline, I stayed up till 3 a.m., not to finish it, but to redesign my website. You know, the one that no one had asked to see. Genius. There's an academic phrase that haunts me, self-complexity theory. It says the more identities you hold, the more resilient you are, but also the more potential conflicts you carry. I was the achiever, the perfectionist, the cool, under-pressure guy, the reluctant genius, the tortured creative. Too many masks, not enough truth. And every time one of those identities got challenged, say, I actually had to deliver something substantial, I'd retreat into another one. Like a mental shell game. Poof. Where'd he go? Want something off topic, but weirdly on brand? The average person has about 6,000 thoughts per day. I'm pretty sure 5,992 of mine were about avoiding commitment in some disguised way. Commit to a project? Too risky. Commit to a habit? Too rigid. Commit to success? Too visible. I didn't fear failure. I rehearsed it like a monologue. I had failure scenarios mapped out with alternate endings. But success? That was uncharted territory. Success meant I had to show up consistently, be judged, risk losing what I gained. And for someone like me, who'd turned potential into a safe space, that was terrifying. There's this joke I tell myself sometimes. I'm not afraid of flying. I'm afraid of landing. Because that's when people look. That's when the applause or the silence starts. That's when you stop being theoretical and start being real. And smart people are especially prone to theoretical living. We love frameworks, plans, conversations. We could discuss strategy for hours without touching a single piece of reality. We treat action like a postgraduate course. I'll enroll when I'm done thinking. But here's the catch. Smart doesn't mean brave. Smart doesn't mean fulfilled. Smart just means you can see all the angles. And sometimes seeing all the angles makes it impossible to move. You get stuck in analysis, paralyzed by options, haunted by the ghost of a better version of you who would have done it already. I remember once talking to a friend who asked me, point blank, if you're so smart, why aren't you doing more? I laughed. Then I felt sick, because that question exposed a rift between my self-image and my reality. I was smart, but I wasn't using it. I was using it to hide. Because let's be honest, if you try and fail, that's scary. But if you try and succeed, now there's pressure. Expectations. No more, I could if I wanted to. Now you have to keep proving it. That's why people build identities around being almost successful. It's safer. You get sympathy and mystique. The tragic genius. The underrated underdog. But that identity has a short shelf life. Eventually, people stop waiting. They stop expecting. And worse, you stop believing. You tell yourself the window closed, that your moment passed. But the truth is, the moment never left. You just kept talking through it. Want a fact that'll make you blink? Crows can recognize individual human faces and hold grudges. I think my future self was like that crow, watching me, remembering, quietly resenting all the chances I didn't take. And it wasn't that I didn't care. It's that I cared too much. I wanted it too badly. That's what made me freeze. Because when something matters that deeply, you don't want to see it crumble. So you delay. Perfect. Adjust. Think. 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 Until the thinking becomes a cocoon. And the cocoon becomes a coffin. Eventually, I had to admit something brutal to myself. I was using my intelligence like a shield. But shields don't move you forward. They just protect you while you stay still. And I was tired of standing still. I wanted to fail honestly more than succeed hypothetically. That was the shift. So I stopped treating my brain like a fortress and started treating it like a launch pad. I stopped rehearsing failure and started risking it. Not every day, not perfectly, but more than before. And something strange happened. I started getting braver. Not more certain, just more willing. And honestly, that's all you really need. The thing about calendars, those innocent little rectangles full of hopeful boxes, is that they never lie. They just sit there completely neutral, waiting for you to either step up or chicken out. And I had a long, decorated history of canceling on my own life. Every time I scheduled something serious, I'd get that little thrill. You know the one. That brief dopamine hit of look at me, planning my future. I typed the event into my digital calendar, color-coded it, Maybe even give it a cool title like Big Move Day or Launch Prep or Write Chapter 1. And then, right on cue, the dance began. At first, it would start small, a little unease, maybe a weird craving for pickles. Then suddenly I was deeply invested in reorganizing my desktop icons or updating the firmware on my headphones. By the day of the event, full-blown internal courtroom drama. Do I really need to do this today? I mean, isn't it better to wait until I'm in the right mindset? The answer, of course, was always wait. And just like that, the calendar became my witness and accomplice in a well-polished crime, self-deferral. There's a fascinating psychological concept called time inconsistency. It's the idea that we value immediate rewards more than future ones, even if the future rewards are objectively better. I was a textbook case. Present me wanted comfort. Future me wanted success. Guess who usually won? Present me was a schemer, a smooth talker. He knew exactly how to make future me look like the problem. Well, if you had more discipline, we wouldn't be rescheduling this again. Gaslighting myself, one click at a time. You ever see a dog spin in circles before lying down? That was me with my plans. Circling them endlessly. Getting close. Never landing. I used to set alarms for things I wasn't going to do. Not because I wanted reminders, but because I needed the illusion of intent. If it was in the calendar, it felt real, right? Like I was almost doing it. That almost was my addiction. There's open academic debate about whether people with high conscientiousness actually follow through better or just manage guilt more efficiently. I didn't care which camp I was in. I just knew that I was scheduling things not to do them, but to buy time. I was using calendars like camouflage. The weirdest part? It wasn't even just the big stuff. I do this for tiny commitments too, like journaling. I had an event labeled Daily Brain Dump, 7 a.m. sharp. You want to know how many times I actually did it at 7 a.m.? 0. Most days I was still scrolling Reddit at 8:30 in bed, trying to convince myself that reading other people's hot takes was research. Meanwhile, I had Wi-Fi, health insurance, and Google Calendar, and I couldn't commit to my own potential for more than 3 consecutive days. At some point, it became clear I wasn't flaky. I wasn't lazy. I was afraid. The pattern was too consistent. Anytime I got close to something meaningful, really close, I find a way to delay it. Oh, the timing's not right. My energy's off today. I need more information before I dive in. No, I didn't. I needed to stop treating scheduling like a substitute for action. And more importantly, I had to stop lying to myself with my own intentions. So I tried something weird. 1 month, I cleared my entire calendar. Every single event. Gone. Blank white space. And I told myself, nothing gets scheduled unless I'm willing to show up for it no matter what mood I'm in. That cleared out about 90% of what I thought I had to do. What remained was small, humble, but real. I also started doing something I call emergency scheduling. It's like emergency savings, but for courage. Whenever I felt a flash of bravery, like right now I could totally do that thing I keep avoiding, I drop everything and do it immediately. No prep, no fanfare. Just act on it before my anxiety committee could organize a rebuttal. I still remember the first time I did it. I had been putting off emailing someone I admired for months. I kept telling myself I needed to craft the perfect message. But one afternoon, in a burst of rare boldness, I opened Gmail and wrote a 2-sentence message. Hit send before I could second-guess it. It felt like setting off a firework. My heart was in my throat. My hands were sweaty, but it was done. That moment rewired something. It showed me that most of the time, the dread of doing a thing is way worse than the thing itself. We suffer more in imagination than in execution. There's a reason people say the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. What they don't say is that most people stand at the hole for years, holding the seed, waiting for perfect weather. But success doesn't grow in perfect weather. It grows in a mess. And I didn't sleep enough, but I showed up anyway. Into this isn't ideal, but let's go. In the willingness to let your calendar reflect your courage, not your fear. Now, I'm not saying you should schedule your entire life down to the last breath. I'm saying that your calendar isn't just a record of your intentions. It's a mirror. And if that mirror shows more hesitation than hunger, it's time to rewire the way you use time. So that's what I did. Slowly, I started putting things on the calendar that scared me. Not huge things, just things I usually danced around. And when the day came, I didn't ask how I felt. I didn't renegotiate. I showed up, not because I was motivated, but because I didn't want to be a ghost in my own life anymore. And that's the hardest part about fear of success. It doesn't look like fear. It looks like busyness. It looks like flaking. It looks like I'll do it next week. But under all of it, there's a tiny, trembling voice asking, what if I'm not enough once I actually try? To that voice, I say, try anyway. Let the calendar become a promise, not a prediction. There was a time, like embarrassingly recently, when I almost got swept away by hustle culture. You know the vibe. Those grainy Instagram reels of dudes in hoodies sipping black coffee at 4:45 a.m., whispering things like, no one cares, work harder, while trap music pulses in the background. For a minute, I thought maybe that's what I needed. To go all in, to push through, to grind so hard my bones squeaked. I tried it, and I hated it. I set an alarm for 5 a.m., slammed down half a banana and a pre-workout drink I didn't understand, and did push-ups in my living room like I was preparing for a prison riot. I meditated with clenched fists. I opened my laptop and stared at it like it had personally wronged me. I typed one sentence and deleted it 7 times. By 9 a.m., I was exhausted, not inspired, not productive, just tired, jittery, and vaguely angry at the sun for rising too enthusiastically. Turns out, grind mode doesn't work for everyone, especially not for people who are hiding from their own ambition. That's the thing nobody tells you about hustle culture. For some people, it's a launch pad. For others, it's a hiding place, a way to stay in motion without moving forward. And for me, it was just another mask. Another way to avoid the terrifying calm that comes with genuine clarity. You ever walk into a gym and just wander from machine to machine without committing to a full set? That was my life. Jumping from idea to idea, job to job, plan to plan. Always sweating, never growing. Because when you stop, when you get quiet, when you sit with your thoughts, that's when the truth shows up. And for a long time, I didn't want to meet it. Truth is awkward. It doesn't wear deodorant. It shows up early, stays late, and eats all your chips. It tells you you've been working hard on the wrong things. That you've been productive just long enough to avoid doing the one thing that actually scares you, committing to a direction. Hustle culture nearly had me convinced that more was the goal. More work, more noise, more motion. But more what? No one ever says. Because clarity is boring. It doesn't sell supplements or online courses. But it works. Clarity says, pick one thing and do it well. That's what scared me the most. Choosing, committing. Not because I didn't want to succeed, but because once you choose, you close the door on everything else. And suddenly, all your possible lives collapse into one. The fantasy fades. Reality begins. That's why hustle culture feels safer. If you're always grinding, you never have to arrive. You can post vague motivational quotes, film time-lapse videos of yourself, writing in Moleskine notebooks, and never actually finish a damn thing. It's performance, aesthetic ambition, and I was a master of it. You know what finally broke me? It was a Tuesday, mid-morning. I was on my 3rd cup of coffee and my 4th productivity podcast of the week. The host was interviewing a millionaire who said, if you're not making 7 figures by 30, you're not even trying. I'm not proud of this, but I actually said out loud to no one, oh, go eat a sock. Because in that moment, I realized I'd been chasing someone else's definition of success. Not mine. Someone louder, slicker, with a YouTube channel and a rented Lamborghini. But I didn't want to be a brand. I want to be free. And freedom, I learned, doesn't come from more hours or more hustle. It comes from focus, from subtracting the noise, from cutting away every version of success that isn't yours. There's this psychological concept called goal dilution. It means that the more goals you pursue at once, the less committed you are to any of them. And oh boy, was I deluded. I had so many goals they started overlapping like badly planned Zoom calls. Write a book, launch a product, grow my brand, meditate, deadlift my weight, cook more meals, learn Spanish, save the whales. You know how many of those I actually finished? 0. But I had great Pinterest boards about them. Eventually, I made myself a rule. No more goals unless they terrified me and excited me at the same time. If it didn't make me sit up a little straighter and go, oh, it didn't make the cut. That's how I found my real ambition. Not the polished, presentable kind. The messy, stubborn kind that doesn't look good on Instagram, but feels true in your bones. Want a weird fact? There's a species of jellyfish that can technically live forever. Turritopsis dohrnii. It reverts its cells back to an earlier state when it gets stressed. That was me. Every time life got too real, I'd revert. Start over. Become a beginner again. It felt safe. Clean. But eventually, I had to admit that starting over was just another form of hiding. So I quit the hustle. Cold turkey. No more 5 a.m. alarms. No more grind now, shine later. I replaced it with something simpler, quieter, and much, much harder. Consistency. I made a tiny promise to myself, something laughably small. I'd write 300 words every morning before checking my phone. That's it. No goal. No public post. Just a private ritual. A rebellion against the myth that more noise means more success. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was pretending. I felt like I was building something. Not for clicks. Not for followers. For me. That's the secret hustle culture doesn't sell. Real success is boring. It's quiet. It looks like showing up when nobody's watching. It looks like saying no to things that used to impress you. It looks like growing roots. I used to think talent was the golden ticket. That if I was just talented enough, everything else would fall into place. The world would open like a motion-activated door. People would see it, feel it, and roll out the red carpet, right? I mean, how could they not? Talent was never the problem. It was the excuse. That's hard to admit, especially when you've been told your whole life that you're gifted or ahead of your age. People love to say things like that. They don't realize those compliments carry a hidden curse. Suddenly, you're not just a person anymore. You're potential. Potential on legs. A future promise no one asked you to sign, but now it's legally binding in the court of public opinion. It starts young. A teacher tells you you're special. You get good at something faster than others. Everyone claps. And deep down, you make a quiet deal. If I keep being impressive, I'll keep being safe. The problem? When being talented becomes your whole identity, it becomes incredibly dangerous to actually prove it. Because once you try, really try, you risk revealing that maybe you're not that special after all. Maybe you're just fine, capable, solid, human. So instead of building on your talent, you protect it. You become the curator of a museum full of unopened gifts. Every idea stays in the sketchbook. Every plan stays hypothetical. You don't launch, you loiter. That was me for years. A graveyard of drafts, half-written songs, projects with gorgeous cover art but zero content. Talent everywhere, but nothing finished. Why? Because finishing meant revealing. And what if people saw it and said, "Oh, that's it"? I think the worst thing a talented person can hear isn't criticism. It's indifference. So we hedge our bets. We say we could have done it if we wanted to, that we're just not in the mood. We get really good at being almost ready, because as long as we're in the almost zone, no one can judge us. There's a phrase in psychology, defensive pessimism. It's when you lower your expectations on purpose so you don't have to deal with disappointment. I lived there, pitched a tent, set up a grill, and cooked all my dreams well done. And it looked productive from the outside. I stayed involved. I read all the books, took all the courses, started countless Google Docs titled Big Idea, Draft Final, for real this time. But nothing shipped, because talent, for all its glitter, can't move on its own. It needs help. It needs discipline. It needs exposure. And most painfully, it needs failure. Want something random? The world's most talented tightrope walker, Charles Blondin, once carried a man on his back across Niagara Falls. Blindfolded. True story. He could have just walked. Alone. Easy. But he took on extra weight. Risk, because talent thrives under pressure, not behind padding. I never carried anyone across a waterfall. But I carried fear. Everywhere. There was this project I worked on for almost a year. It was good. Maybe even great. And right before the release date, I pulled the plug. Told myself the timing wasn't right. But deep down, I knew. I wasn't protecting the work. I was protecting myself. Because if I released it and it didn't explode, That would kill the myth of my potential. People would know, but no one really cares how talented you are if you don't use it. They'll be impressed for a while, but eventually they move on to people who show up, people who deliver. And I hated that. I wanted to be enough without doing the hard part. The worst moment came one evening when I saw someone I barely knew post something simple, a blog, a video, a little creative thing. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it was done. And the comments? Full of love, support, growth. I remember feeling this tight, sick knot in my stomach, because I knew I could have done something better, but I didn't. And now I couldn't even enjoy what they made because I was too busy resenting my own cowardice. That's when it hit me. I'd weaponized my own talent, use it to hold others at bay, to tell myself I was above the grind. But in reality, I was below it. I wasn't in the arena. I was in the bleachers, critiquing people who were sweating. That's the moment I started changing. I decided to flip the equation. Instead of asking, am I good enough to do this? I asked, am I willing to get better by doing it badly first? Because that's the part they don't teach you in gifted kid school. Talent is just A1. The rest is showing up with your sleeves rolled up and your ego duct taped to the floor. There's this theory in neuroscience, neuroplasticity, that says our brains literally reshape based on what we do consistently. Not what we intend or what we dream about, but what we do. Every unfinished project was a missed opportunity to change my brain. Every delay, a choice to stay the same. So I got loud, not flashy loud. I started posting the rough drafts, recording the shaky takes, sharing the first tries. Not because they were good, but because they were real. And real, over time, becomes undeniable. People started noticing, not because I was more talented, but because I was visible, consistent, not hiding behind promise anymore, just doing the thing. And you know what? It felt better than I imagined. Not the applause, the alignment, the sense that I was finally living in the same room as my gifts, not just staring at them through the window. So here's the truth. Talent is never the problem. The problem is waiting for it to be enough. It never will be. But that's okay, because action doesn't require perfection. It just requires permission. And I gave that to myself. Finally, compliments used to be my favorite drug. Not the generic kind, nice work or you're smart, but the delicious, finely crafted ones. The ones that implied I was rare, different, that I had something special in me, some untapped brilliance waiting for the right moment. I ate that stuff up like cereal at midnight. But here's the thing about compliments. If you're not careful, they become traps. You start performing for them, chasing them, and eventually, you fear losing them more than you fear never achieving anything real. It crept up on me slowly. People would say things like, you're destined for something big, or I can't wait to see what you do next. At first, I nod and feel proud, but eventually, those words started to feel heavy, because next implies you've already done something. And sometimes I hadn't. Not really. And yet, the more people praised me, the more I froze. Because now I had something to protect, a reputation, an image, even if it was built on smoke and Instagram captions. It felt fragile, like a balloon I had to carry around without bumping into anything sharp, especially the truth. There's a phrase in psychology, positive expectation pressure. It's when high expectations from others lead to performance anxiety, self-doubt, even underachievement. It's counterintuitive, but very real. Compliments, for all their sweetness, can become shackles. I used to delay launching projects not because I wasn't ready, but because I was terrified they wouldn't measure up to the version of me people had in their heads. That glowing, effortless, slightly mysterious version. The one who's so talented but low-key. If I released something mediocre, the illusion might die. And the illusion was comforting. There's an offbeat fact I think about often. In 1977, NASA launched the Voyager spacecraft carrying the Golden Record, a collection of music and sounds representing Earth. Somewhere in deep space, that record is still floating. Unheard, unreceived, but full of hope. Sometimes I felt like that. Like I'd put this ideal version of myself into orbit, and everyone saw it spinning out there, perfect and untouchable. But here on Earth, I was just trying to finish a draft without crying. It's a weird place to be, praise for potential. applauded for your future. People mean well, but eventually it starts to feel like you've been booked to perform at a show you never agreed to. And the longer you don't show up, the more the pressure builds. I remember one moment in particular. A friend, kind, supportive, well-meaning, said, "You're so good at everything. I can't believe you're not famous yet." They meant it as a compliment. But what I heard was, "What's taking you so long?" And I wanted to scream. Because I didn't know. I really didn't. I was trying. But somewhere along the way, trying turned into hiding. Because if I stepped out and wasn't brilliant, then I'd be disappointing not just myself, but everyone who ever believed in me. So I started shrinking. Not all at once. Little things. Turning down opportunities. Ghosting projects. Ignoring praise. Building distance between the version of me they saw and the one I was actually living in. That gap? It's where shame lives. And shame is an expert at convincing you to stay silent. It whispers things like, "Don't release that, it's not ready." Or "Wait until it's perfect, they're expecting genius." And you believe it, because you'd rather be mysteriously talented than publicly average. But one day, I had a bizarre realization. What if the compliments weren't pressure? What if they were invitations? Not demands, not ultimatums, just people saying, "We see something in you. Show us more." It changed everything. Because if you stop treating praise like a contract and start treating it like a mirror, you realize something beautiful. Most people just want to connect. They're not expecting perfection. They're hoping for honesty, for presence, for you. There's an academic debate about whether self-concept is formed primarily through internal reflection or external feedback. Honestly, I think it's both. But when external feedback starts to dominate, you forget your own voice. So I decided to reclaim it. I made a rule. I wouldn't hide behind compliments anymore. If someone praised me, I'd say thank you, and then ask myself, what's one small action I can take to honor that belief in me? Not prove it, honor it. That shift was subtle but huge. Instead of feeling crushed by expectations, I started seeing them as light posts. Friendly reminders, not cages. And you know what helped? Sharing the in-process stuff, the messy drafts, the awkward first versions. I post a paragraph I was unsure about, or a project I wasn't proud of yet. And people didn't recoil. They leaned in. Because people aren't in love with your polish, they're in love with your progress. And slowly, the fear started to loosen. Compliments no longer felt like traps. They became checkpoints, moments of pause, tiny lights on the path. Do I still get scared? Sure. But now I try to thank the fear, because it means I'm showing up for real. Not as the version of me people imagine, but the version that actually exists. So if you're someone who feels frozen by praise, if you're secretly dodging compliments because they make you feel like you're behind, I get it. But maybe, just maybe, those words weren't pressure at all. Maybe they were the sound of someone believing in you before you did. There's this weird thing that happens when you start changing. People don't always see it. Or worse, they do, but they don't believe it'll stick. Because in their minds, you're still you. The old version. The one you spent years teaching them to expect. And even as you evolve, grow, stretch into someone new, they keep looking for signs of the person you used to be. Like your growth is just a costume you'll take off any minute now. And sometimes they're right. I remember a night I thought would feel like freedom. I was deep into one of those late-night epiphanies, candles lit, lo-fi playing, journal wide open, and I wrote this bold line in capital letters. I am not who I used to be. Felt powerful, cathartic, like I just punched a hole in my own mythology. But the next morning I woke up groggy, checked my phone, and instantly slipped into the exact same loop. Notifications, coffee, minor anxiety spiral. The old me was right there, sitting on the couch like he'd never left. Turns out, the ghost of your past self is a tenant you can't evict overnight. There's a theory in cognitive psychology called identity inertia. It's the idea that once you build a self-image, it takes significant, sustained disruption to truly shift it. That's why it's so hard to change your habits, because your brain's constantly trying to return you to homeostasis, which is a fancy word for familiar dysfunction. And my dysfunction? It had personality. It wore hoodies, made jokes, dodged responsibility with grace. The old me had charisma. He was charming, likable, clever. He just didn't finish anything. And the worst part? I missed him. Because being him meant never having to prove anything. Just being almost brilliant was enough. People expect less from ghosts. You can haunt ideas all day long and no one calls you a coward. But when you show up in flesh and blood with a real offering, that's different. That's dangerous. There's this oddly comforting fact I stumbled on once. Butterflies remember being caterpillars. Even after liquefying inside their cocoons and literally reassembling themselves, some neurons survive. The transformation doesn't erase the past. It carries it forward. That's beautiful. And also kind of haunting. Because what if that's me? What if no matter how much I change, that old self is still riding shotgun? There were days where I'd feel so clear, so new, and then a minor trigger would send me back. One rejection, one lazy morning, one offhand comment from a friend that hit too close to home. You've always been like this. I hated that sentence because it was true until it wasn't. But convincing other people you've changed is nothing compared to convincing yourself. That's the real work. Because even after progress, your brain keeps whispering, we know who you really are. It's why I stopped chasing big declarations. You know the kind. This is the year I become unstoppable. I used to make those all the time. Post them. Write them on my mirrors in dry erase marker. It felt good. Loud. But loud fades fast. So I started whispering my changes instead. Not announcing. Just doing. Quiet, boring, unsexy consistency. Showing up. Finishing. Not perfectly, but completely. And eventually, the ghost stopped talking so loud. I think the biggest mistake I made was assuming the old me had to die for the new me to live. That's not how it works. You don't kill your past self. You integrate them. You forgive them. You let them sit in the back seat while you drive. They don't disappear. They just stop steering. You want a weird metaphor? I read once that certain species of starfish can regenerate an entire new body from just one arm. Meaning if you cut off a piece, that piece will become a new starfish. That's both disgusting and poetic. I think our identities do that too. You can't completely erase who you were. It grows in shadows. But what you can do is grow something stronger in the light. Something rooted. The big turning point for me was the day I stopped trying to outperform the old me and started trying to understand him. I looked at all the patterns I hated, the flaking, the avoidance, the perfectionism, and I realized he was just scared, not lazy, not arrogant, just afraid that success would expose how messy and unworthy he felt underneath. So I stopped trying to silence him. I started listening, and slowly I began to change the story. From, I'm the guy who never finishes anything, to, I'm someone learning to finish even when it's hard. From, I'm the underachiever with potential, to, I'm someone who shows up even when it's scary. And let me tell you something wild. The more I showed up as this newer version of myself, the more others followed suit. They stopped referencing the old me. They started believing the new one. But only after I did. There's this phrase I came up with one night while staring at a blinking cursor. Your past doesn't disappear. It just stops being the loudest thing in the room. That's all we can ask for, really. Not to be brand new. Just to stop being held hostage by a version of ourselves we've outgrown. So now, when I feel that ghost creeping up again, the urge to procrastinate, to doubt, to self-sabotage, don't panic. I just nod and say, I see you, but we're not doing that today. And then I keep going. My brain is a great storyteller. It doesn't write books or poems or screenplays. No, my brain is more of a personal documentary filmmaker. It edits moments, adds dramatic voiceovers, distorts the lighting, and cuts out anything that doesn't support the plot it already decided on. And the plot? That I'm better at planning than finishing. That I'm not quite there yet. That success would be a fluke, if it ever came at all. That's the thing no one really explains about fear of success. It's not just about outcomes. It's about narratives. The quiet, persistent ones your mind loops behind the scenes. You don't even notice how often they play until something challenges them. One time, I actually had someone compliment my consistency, said I seemed really dialed in lately. And instead of saying thank you, my first reaction was to question it. Me? Consistent? I laughed. Out loud. Like they'd mistaken me for someone else. Because my internal narrator had already written a very different story, and it had years of footage to back it up. I think it's what they call confirmation bias. You interpret new information in ways that confirm your existing beliefs. So even if you do something right, show up, make progress, your brain finds a way to file it under fluke instead of growth. It's like having a GPS that reroutes everything back to self-doubt. Doesn't matter where you're going. The system will find a reason why you're still lost. But here's the kicker. I didn't know my brain was lying to me. Not at first. Because the lies were soft, plausible, wrapped in logic. You just need more time. This wasn't the right season. You worked better under pressure. The voice wasn't cruel. It was reasonable. Helpful, even. That's how it tricked me. It wasn't screaming, "You're worthless." It was whispering, "You're not ready." And that's way more seductive. Because it sounds kind. There's this phrase in philosophy, epistemic humility. It means admitting that what you believe might not be true, even if it feels true. I had none of that. I trusted my feelings like they were facts carved into stone. But feelings are often just old thoughts with better marketing. Like this one, "You've never been good at finishing things." It felt true. I had examples. Proof. A digital cemetery of abandoned projects. But then I thought, wait, that's not entirely accurate. I have finished things. Small things. Quiet things. Things no one saw. So why doesn't my brain remember those? Because the narrator wasn't documenting victories. It was collecting evidence. Like some obsessive lawyer preparing a case against me. And once I realized that, everything started to shift. I began fact-checking my memories. Not dramatically, just gently. When I'd hear the old voice pipe up, "You're not a doer, you're a dreamer," I'd stop and think, okay, but what if I am both? I'd list out moments I'd shown up, finished something, stuck to a new pattern. Suddenly, the case against me wasn't so airtight. And that's when I realized the brain can be a bad historian. It doesn't record everything. It records what you tell it to. And for years, I was feeding it the wrong stories. Like the one where every delay meant I wasn't cut out for success. Or the one where every missed deadline proved I wasn't disciplined enough. Those stories were easier to carry than the truth. Because the truth meant responsibility. The truth meant that I had power. And power? That's terrifying. It means you can no longer pretend you're at the mercy of your flaws. Want a weird fact? The mantis shrimp has 16 color-receptive cones in its eyes. Humans have 3. It can see colors we can't even imagine. And sometimes I wonder, what if our minds are just as limited? What if success is already here, already happening, but we don't recognize it because it's not in a shade we're trained to see? I used to think success had to feel dramatic, loud, obvious, like a movie montage with a killer soundtrack. But sometimes it's just showing up on a Tuesday when you said you would. Sometimes it's hitting send on an email you've rewritten 10 times. And sometimes it's looking at your reflection and not flinching. But my brain didn't record those wins. It skipped over them like DVD menu previews because they didn't match the narrative. They were inconvenient truths. So I started journaling, not for clarity, but for evidence. Not Dear Diary stuff, more like court transcripts. Just facts. I'd write down what I did despite the fear, where I showed up, what I created. No adjectives, just proof. And after a few weeks, a quiet confidence started to grow. Not loud, not manic, just a grounded sense of, wait a minute, maybe I'm not who I thought I was. Maybe I'm better. There's an open debate in neuroscience about whether memory is more like a recording or a reconstruction. Most scientists lean toward the latter, meaning every time you remember something, you're rebuilding it. Slightly distorted, slightly rewritten. And that gave me an idea. What if I started intentionally reconstructing my own narrative? Not lying, but re-emphasizing the truth. Choosing which stories to highlight, which patterns to notice. If the brain wants to tell stories, fine. I'd give it better material. So now, when I do something brave, no matter how small, I make a point of recording it. Not for social media, not for anyone else, just for the narrator. So next time I hear the old script playing, I can say, hey, that's outdated. We got new footage now, and it's working. I still stumble, still forget, still wake up some days feeling like a fraud. But now, I know it's just the narrator talking, and I get to choose whether I believe them. or mute them, or better yet, hand them a new script. At one point in my life, I had 5 productivity apps on my phone. Not 5 folders, 5 separate apps. One for tasks, one for scheduling, one for habits, one for time blocking, and one, this is real, for logging how often I checked the other 4. I told myself it was optimization, that I was building systems. But I wasn't. I was decorating a hamster wheel. You ever look at your to-do list and realize it's just a bunch of carefully curated avoidance? Not overt, subtle, polished. You do the easy stuff first, the low-stakes stuff. You organize things that don't matter. You spend 45 minutes tweaking a Canva graphic for a project you haven't even started. That was me. Every day. A productivity magician with no actual magic. I had mastered the illusion of momentum. People would say, wow, you're always working on something. And I was. Constantly. But I was producing almost nothing. I was addicted to the setup, to the prep. Because real work, deep, focused, soul-exposing work, was terrifying. So I kept myself safely occupied. There's a fascinating psychological term for this: structured procrastination. It's when you avoid an important task by doing less important tasks that still make you feel productive. Like deep cleaning your kitchen instead of writing your business plan. Or updating your resume's font while never applying to anything. And the brain loves this trick because you still get the dopamine, still feel busy, but without the vulnerability of doing the thing that actually counts. I once spent an entire Saturday color-coding my Google Calendar with a 12-category key that included creative planning, admin prep, and vision incubation. I didn't create anything. I just made a very pretty schedule about how I might create something in the future, if I ever got around to it, which I didn't. It's wild how much energy you can spend organizing your fear. That's what all my hacks were. Fear with a pretty interface. And look, I'm not against systems. Systems are great when they support action. But mine were designed to replace action. They made me feel prepared, competent, smart, which, ironically, made me feel less capable of starting. Because when everything's optimized, the pressure to deliver increases. Now, you don't just have to do the work, you have to do it perfectly with all your tools lined up. It got so bad that I started procrastinating on updating my productivity tools. I had a Trello board labeled Productivity Overhaul. Yes, a meta procrastination project. That's when I knew I'd spiraled. But here's the thing. I wasn't being lazy. I was being protective. I was trying to avoid the vulnerability that real work demands. Because real work reveals you. It shows whether your ideas hold up, whether you've got follow-through, whether you can tolerate the long, boring middle part of a project, the part no one posts about. That's what I was dodging. Not work. Exposure. There's an ongoing academic discussion about whether multitasking actually lowers productivity or just shifts cognitive load. I say, forget the debate. Either way, it made me feel like a computer with 47 tabs open and no clue where the music was coming from. Eventually, I hit a wall. Not a dramatic burnout, just a quiet hollowness. A day where I looked at my immaculate system and realized, I hate this. I had made productivity my personality, and I still wasn't creating anything real. I was optimizing my own stuckness. So I deleted the apps. All of them. Took a deep breath. Then wrote 3 things on a sticky note. 1. What am I avoiding? 2. What would finishing actually feel like? 3. What's the next step? Not the whole plan, just the next inch? I didn't need to plan my entire life. I needed to move 1 inch. That's it. I started building momentum in silence. Not with templates. Not with planners. Just action. A rough draft. A messy page. A single, imperfect post. And slowly, the noise in my head started to quiet. Want something funny? I made more actual progress in 3 weeks of that sticky note system than I had in 6 months of life optimization. Because for the first time, I wasn't managing my work, I was doing it. Not perfectly, not efficiently, but honestly, that's the part hustle culture forgets. Productivity isn't about how much you do. It's about what actually moves you. Not moves the brand, not moves the perception, moves you. Now, when I catch myself reaching for a new system, I ask, am I trying to work better or try to avoid the real work? And if it's the second one, I close the tab and pick up a pen. Not because I'm fixed, but because I'm finally willing to be messy in motion rather than polished in place. There was a day, one single, perfectly average, absolutely forgettable day, when I almost changed my life. I don't mean metaphorically. I mean, I was one decision away from crossing that invisible line between thinking about doing something and actually doing it. And I didn't. I blinked. I hesitated. And the moment passed. That day still visits me sometimes. Not like a ghost, but like a text from an ex you never dated. A reminder of what could have been. I was supposed to show up. Just once. That's all. A meeting I'd scheduled with someone I admired, respected, maybe even low-key idolized. We connected online, exchanged ideas, and they were curious about collaborating on a project, something real, something public, something that would have put me in a new room I'd always dreamed of entering. It wasn't a huge deal on paper, just a casual Zoom chat, but I knew what it meant. And that was the problem, because this wasn't about the conversation. This was about the shift it would trigger. If I showed up fully, if I allowed myself to be seen, engaged, talented, prepared, it might change things. So of course I almost did. I had my notes. I rehearsed my talking points. I made a fresh coffee and even put on a real shirt with buttons for the first time in months. I opened my laptop, clicked the link 5 minutes early, and then, out of nowhere, I felt like I couldn't breathe. My hands got clammy. My heart started sprinting like it was trying to escape. My brain, that faithful overthinker, kicked into full alert mode. This is too much. You're not ready. What if you embarrass yourself? What if they find out you're just pretending to be this person they think you are? And just like that, I did something I can't fully forgive, even now. I closed the laptop, sent a quick message. Hey, something came up. Can we reschedule? That was 3 years ago. We never rescheduled. I told myself it wasn't the right time, that I'd follow up soon, that I'd circle back once I had my act together. You want to know how many minutes have passed since then? Over 1.5 million. You want to know how many times I've replayed that moment in my head? Too many, but not out of regret. Not exactly. More like grief. The grief of an almost life. In Japan, there's a word, yugen, which means a profound, mysterious sense of the beauty of the universe and the sadness of human experience. That's what that day became to me. Beautiful, because it reminded me how close I was. Sad, because I let fear write the ending. People think fear shows up with sirens and shadows. But in reality, it often looks like an I'll do it later. Fear wears sweatpants and speaks in soft logic. Later is better. You're not in the right mindset. It's not a big deal. There'll be other chances. But what if there aren't? What if the thing you're dodging is the actual thing? And what if showing up just once could set off a cascade you can't even predict? That's the part that guts me. The chain reaction that never started. Now, to be fair, I didn't spiral after that. I didn't crash. Life continued. Projects happened. Days unfolded. But deep down, I knew I'd miss something. Because I didn't freeze out of confusion. I froze out of clarity. I knew exactly what was on the table. And it terrified me. There's this idea floating around in education circles called the zone of proximal development. The space between what you can do and what you could do with just a little help or support. That meeting? That was my ZPD moment. I was standing at the edge of who I was and who I might become. And instead of stepping forward, I turned back. Because I didn't trust myself. Not in the big ways. In the small, hidden ones. I didn't trust that I could handle it. That I could live up to the story I wanted to write. I didn't trust that success wouldn't somehow break me. So I chose safety. And the problem with safety is it always costs you something. Usually the very thing you're pretending not to want anymore. I wish I could say that was the last time it happened. That I learned my lesson right away. But that wouldn't be honest. I continued to almost show up. Almost launch. Almost finish. It's death by hesitation. Because you can survive a failure. You can recover from crash. But almost, that lingers. It hangs in the air, a silent weight. Want something strange. The platypus doesn't have a stomach. It literally skipped that organ during evolution. Just eats food and digests it in its gut directly. I think some of us are like that emotionally. We skip the processing stage. We take the hit, absorb it somewhere deep, and pretend we're fine. But that grief goes somewhere. It settles in your habits, your hesitation, your reasons. I carried that skipped meeting like a pebble in my shoe. Small, ignorable, but always there. And over time, it taught me something incredibly valuable. I didn't need to become fearless. I just needed to respond differently to fear. Because fear's not going away. It doesn't leave when you level up. It just changes shape. Sometimes it gets quieter, more polite. Sometimes it sounds like your inner voice. But it's still fear. And now, when I feel it rising, when I get that familiar urge to close the laptop, reschedule, back out, I ask one question. What would happen if I stayed? Not forever. Just long enough to let the moment unfold. Just long enough to let it change me. Because sometimes the only difference between the person you are and the person you could become is whether or not you answer the call. No one is watching. It took me a while to believe that. I mean, intellectually, sure, I knew not everyone cared what I was doing. But emotionally, I believed the world had eyes. That there was always someone keeping score, taking notes, waiting to grade my performance. That imaginary audience was exhausting. They lived in my head, fully cast, and creatively cruel. I imagined their reactions to my posts, their criticisms of my first drafts, their collective disappointment when I didn't live up to the image I thought I was supposed to maintain. They weren't real, but they felt real enough to shape my choices. That's the trap with fear of success. It's not always fear of you seeing what you're capable of. It's fear of others seeing it and deciding it's not enough. Or worse, deciding it is enough and then expecting more. And so I built this invisible panel of critics in my head. Let's call them a committee. They were vague but always present. A mix of past teachers, imaginary peers, faceless internet strangers. I never invited them in, but there they were, folding their arms and squinting at everything I did. Funny thing, most of the time, I was too scared to even publish or release anything for them to criticize. The committee wasn't responding to what I was doing. They were reacting to what I might do. And somehow that was worse. I lived in fear of feedback I hadn't even received yet. There's a psychological term for this called the spotlight effect. It's the tendency to overestimate how much others notice your actions or appearance. And let me tell you, I was a walking spotlight, convinced that any misstep would be broadcast, that every move I made was under scrutiny. But the truth? No one was watching. Not really. People are too busy worrying about their own spotlight to focus on mine. Everyone's looking at their own stage, their own camera, their own script. My so-called audience was mostly projection. And yet, I let them run the show. Want an odd fact? Wombats, those chunky Australian marsupials, poop in cubes. Yeah, literal little bricks. Scientists believe it's so the droppings don't roll away. They use them to mark territory. That's how I was living, dropping neat, calculated little ideas, and carefully keeping them from rolling too far into the open. Everything controlled, everything curated, just enough to mark presence, not enough to provoke judgment. But something happened when I stopped assuming everyone was watching. I started moving faster, writing more, sharing things that weren't fully formed. I'd post a voice memo, a rough video, a messy sketch. Not because it was ready, but because I realized no one really cared how polished it was. They were too caught up in their own mess. The committee? They didn't even show up. And slowly, I stopped imagining them at all. Because the moment I let go of the idea that the world was judging me, I started judging myself differently. Less harshly, more like a mentor than a critic. I started asking myself, what if no one sees this but me? Would I still do it? Would it still matter? And when the answer was yes, that's when I knew I was finally doing the thing for me. Not for likes, not for validation, not to maintain the brand of who I thought I was supposed to be, but because I wanted to see what I was capable of when I stopped performing and started playing. That word changed everything for me. Play. Because when you're playing, you're not worried about being watched. You're immersed, curious, present. And that's when the good stuff shows up, the weird, electric, slightly scary ideas that don't sound like anyone else's voice. That's where success hides. Not in perfection, in play. There's open academic debate about whether creativity is more rooted in constraint or freedom. Honestly, I think it's both. But I'll say this, when I believed I was being watched, I was constrained in the worst way. I wasn't free to experiment. I was only free to impress. And that's not creativity. That's performance anxiety. So I started doing small things quietly with no pressure. I wrote a story that only I would read, made a playlist just for me, designed something ugly on purpose, just to remember what it felt like to make without an audience. And you know what? I found my flow again. Because real flow doesn't come from being good. It comes from being unbothered. That's the real miracle of letting go of the audience. You stop trying to win and start trying to wonder again. You're not asking, will they like it? You're asking, what if this idea surprises me? And that question, it brings back the magic. Now, when I feel that pressure creep in, the need to impress, to perform, I ask myself, who told you someone's watching? And the answer is always the same. You did. So now, I try to remember that I'm allowed to create in the dark, to stumble, to explore, that not every piece of work needs to be shown, shared, or evaluated. That some of the most important breakthroughs come when no one is clapping, when no one's even looking. And the freedom of that, it's wild. It's weird. It's what I was missing. Starting without permission might be the most radical thing I've ever done. Not because it's rebellious, not because it shocks anyone, but because it quietly bypasses a lifetime of conditioning that says, wait your turn. Ask first. Make sure you're ready. I used to believe that. Deep in my marrow, I thought I had to earn momentum, get certified in courage, be appointed to begin. But then one day, I started without it. And everything changed. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't run into the woods or quit my job or shave my head while chanting. It was just a regular day, and I was tired of waiting for someone, anyone, to validate the invisible thing I felt inside, the readiness to move. So I did. I opened a blank page and started writing something I'd been planning for nearly 4 years. No outline, no roadmap, no guarantee it would be good. I just started, and there it was, movement. It was awkward, messy, not remotely impressive, but it was real. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting on some cosmic green light. I realized that light was never coming, because I was the only one who could flip the switch. There's a brilliant line I once heard. You don't need permission to make noise in your own house. I think about that a lot. How many years I tiptoed around my own creativity, waiting for the perfect conditions, as if the world was going to send me a certificate saying, okay, you're good now. Begin. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called activation energy. It's the effort required to start a task. Once it's begun, the energy drops. But the start is the hardest part. For me, that start was tangled up in approval. If I didn't have permission, I hesitated. If I wasn't validated, I paused. I kept thinking, who am I to do this? But eventually, I asked a different question. Who am I not to? I think we all have that instinct, that pull towards some invisible ocean. But we've been trained out of it, told to wait, to prepare, to double-check. And sure, preparation matters, but only if it's not a stand-in for permission. Because the permission slip you're waiting for, you write it. I used to think I needed more time, more skill, more clarity. But what I really needed was audacity. Just a few reckless inches of it. Not enough to burn down my life, just enough to light a match under my excuses. Because when you start without permission, you change your entire relationship with fear. You stop asking, what if I'm not good enough? And you start saying, let's find out. It's not confidence, it's curiosity. And curiosity gets you way further than confidence ever did for me. I started making little deals with myself. I'll work on this for 10 minutes, and if it sucks, fine. I'll post this draft, even if it's not perfect. I'll try this scary thing, even if no one claps. And each time, the sky didn't fall. Each time, I got a little stronger. People often say, I'm just not ready. And hey, I get that. But readiness is a moving target. The truth is, you don't need to feel ready. You need to act ready. You need to show up in the middle of the doubt and start anyway. I started doing things before I had the answers, before I had the title, before I had the confidence. And the irony? The confidence came after. It wasn't the starting point. It was the byproduct. One time, I got invited to speak at a small creative workshop. Nothing huge, just 10 people. But I almost said no. Why? Because I didn't think I was qualified. because I wasn't a real speaker, because I'd never done it before. But then I remembered, everyone who's ever done something amazing did it for the first time once. So I said yes. Terrified, shaky voice, sweaty palms. I showed up anyway, and I wasn't amazing. I was just present, and that was enough. Someone came up after and said, "You made me feel like I could do this too." And in that moment, I realized the power of starting without a title, without fanfare, without perfection. It gives others permission to do the same. And that's how momentum spreads. There's an open academic debate about whether courage is an innate trait or a practiced habit. I think it's both. But I know this, every time I started without permission, I got a little more courageous. Not because I was fearless, but because I acted while still afraid. You don't need to wait until you feel qualified. Start while you're underqualified. Let the doing become your education. So now I try not to wait. If something pulls me, I lean in. If something scares me, I take a small step toward it. And if something whispers, "Not yet," I whisper back, "Maybe now." Because the magic doesn't happen when you're finally ready. It happens when you finally begin. You're not broken. I wish someone had told me that sooner. Not in a cheesy, TikTok therapy kind of way, but in the quiet, grounding way that actually sinks in. You're not damaged. You're not defective. You're not some cautionary tale waiting for a better version of you to take over. You're just bored. That's it. It hit me one afternoon, while I was mindlessly scrolling through a fourth consecutive video about how to unlock your inner genius, surrounded by cold coffee and the soft hum of a laptop that had gone to sleep on me. I wasn't failing because I lacked ability. I wasn't stuck because I didn't know what to do. I was stuck because I was too underwhelmed by the life I'd created to actually engage with it. And if I'm being honest, that underwhelm felt safe. Fear of success, I realized, was really a fear of aliveness, of stretching into new skin, of moving from intellectual stimulation into emotional risk. Because boredom, for all its dullness, is also predictable, comfortable. It doesn't demand anything of you. It doesn't require excellence or vulnerability. It just hums along, numbing your edges, keeping you fine. But fine is not a life. There's an ancient psychological concept called anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. It's often associated with depression, but I think there's a cultural version of it too. A kind of creative anhedonia, where you stop reaching for what lights you up, not because you're incapable, but because you've trained yourself to prefer the gray, to prefer what's manageable over what's meaningful. That's where I was, checking boxes, starting projects, making plans, but always a step removed from anything that actually felt alive. And aliveness, as it turns out, is terrifying. Because when you start chasing what excites you, what really deeply excites you, it forces everything else to come into focus. Your bad habits, your false narratives, the people in your life who expect you to stay small. Success doesn't just elevate you, it exposes you. And that's what I'd been avoiding. I didn't want to see myself fully. I didn't want to risk becoming someone I couldn't explain to people who liked the old me better. So I told myself I was unmotivated, that I lacked clarity. But none of that was true. I was just bored with the safe version of my own story. You ever see a cat in a too small box, just curled up tight, pretending it fits? That was me, adapting to a shape that didn't suit me anymore. And eventually, that compression turns into resentment. Not toward the world, but toward yourself. Because deep down, you know what you're capable of. You know you're not broken. You know you've just gotten very good at avoiding the things that might actually light you up. And you've accepted a life that fits just enough to keep you quiet. I don't say that to be harsh. I say it because it broke me open. The realization that my fear wasn't of success itself, but of the consequences of success. The schedule changes, the judgment, the discomfort of leveling up, the grief of outgrowing people, the awkwardness of new expectations. And yet, what's the alternative? A curated, manageable life that never asks anything real of you? No thank you. That's what waking up from fear of success felt like. Not a transformation, a defrosting. I didn't become someone new. I just returned to someone I'd been avoiding, someone I liked more than I expected to. And now, I don't aim for perfect days. I aim for real ones. I follow the spark, not the plan. I let boredom be a signal, not a sentence. And I trust that success, when it comes, won't crush me. It'll expand me, but only if I let it. So if you're sitting there, staring down the barrel of your own, almost wondering why you can't make yourself move, know this. You're not lazy. You're not broken. You're just waiting to care again. So give yourself something worth caring about. Something exciting enough to make the fear worth it. And then, start. Before you feel ready. Start without permission. Start bored if you must. But for the love of your future self, start. We've reached the end now. And if your brain feels a little tender, like someone gently turned on all the lights in a room you forgot existed, good. That's how you know you were really here. This wasn't a guide to success. It wasn't a playbook or a step-by-step hack. It was something messier, softer. It was a mirror, one you had to sit in front of for a while before you saw what you'd been avoiding. That fear of success doesn't come from weakness. It comes from knowing, deep down, what you're capable of, and then holding your breath anyway. Maybe you saw yourself in the person who kept rescheduling their future. Maybe you felt the sting of almost showing up. Maybe you remembered a time when someone believed in you, and you backed away because being seen felt too heavy. That's okay. We all carry ghosts of who we used to be, but that's not where it ends. The truth is, the fear never goes away. You just learn how to walk with it. You learn how to speak over it. You learn how to trade boredom for bravery, hesitation for momentum, and old narratives for new evidence. Because you're not broken. You're not late. You're not invisible. You're just standing at the edge, heart pounding, wondering if it's okay to finally step into the version of you that's been knocking. It is. So take the next step. In silence if you have to. With shaking hands. Without applause. Without permission. Because no one's watching as closely as you think. And because you don't need their validation to begin. You just need your own. So whisper, let's try, and move. 1 inch forward, 1 inch braver. I'll see you there.